Have you ever wondered just how robust Sony's E-mount lens line is, or how robust the third-party lens ecosystem around it is? Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and I'll just cut to the chase with this week's announcement of the $1,500 FE 100mm f2.8 STF lens on top of Sony's 2016 introduction of the G Master lens line. I named the 85mm lens of the year in 2016. Sony has made it clear that it has gotten very serious very quickly now about high quality native E-mount glass. And with the companion announcement this week of their $600 85mm 1.8 full frame, along with their recent deliveries of the full frame 50mm 1.8 for $200 and 50mm 2.8 macro for $450, it's equally clear that Sony is getting serious about moderately priced full frame primes as well, which is impressive and further proof that along with the growing roster of E-mount still and cine lenses from third parties like Zeiss, Sigma, Rokinon, Vedra, Voigtlander, and now even legendary Cooke Optics. I'll have more to share with you on this last one shortly. The E-mount lens ecosystem is burgeoning. It has momentum. Never mind the fact that you can adapt pretty much any lens ever made because of its short flange distance, like micro four thirds. For right now, though, let's focus on native Sony E-mount lenses and get into some details. Now, on the one hand, at the time I did a web search, B&H listed more than 30 different US spec Sony E-mount lenses, split pretty evenly between full frame and APS-C, though many of the APS-C are consumer grade zooms. On the other hand, B&H lists almost 80 US Canon lenses, 63 full frame, 16 APS-C, and more than 100 Nikon lenses, 81 full frame, 25 APS-C. And these are just their DSLR lenses. These numbers don't include their dedicated mirrorless lens lines like Canon's EOS M series. Well, that's what happens when you've got decades-long head starts like the big boys do. On the third hand, it ain't just the quantity, is it? Here's the thing. When you click over to DxOMark, yeah, imperfect, yada yada, but still top of my list for this sort of thing, only 4 of DxOMark's top 20 ranked lenses are even mounted to a Canon body, and that is with the 50 megapixel 5DS. Nikon and Sony are tied at 6 lenses apiece. Think about that. Sony's lens ecosystem tied Nikon and beat Canon at the very top of the lens pyramid of DxOMark's tested lenses. Might the numbers have skewed a little more in Nikon's favor if it had a 42 megapixel or 50 megapixel sensor body in the mix? Yeah, probably. Might the numbers have skewed a little more in Sony's direction if it had had a 50 megapixel sensor body? Again, probably. What happened to the other 4 top 20, you might ask? You only sum up to 16. Well, good question. This is one of those occasional oddities of DxOMark. I ticked off every lens manufacturer and every mount, but their number 3, 6, 10, and 14 top-rated lenses were simply absent. So I just limited it to 16. Then again, it is important to point out that none of the next 4 placeholders were Sony, but instead a Sigma on the 5DS, a pair of Nikons and a Zeiss on the D800E. And it also has to be said that Nikon and Canon surpass Sony as we reach deeper into their lens lineups. The big boys have more high-quality zooms and unanswered long telephoto supremacy, and offer more high-quality, more moderately priced lenses as you get into the fat part of their offerings. Still, Sony was the only camera manufacturer whose directly manufactured lenses show up at all in the top 20, too, with a third joint effort with Zeiss. The others placing in DxO's top 20 are Zeiss, 9 lenses across all 3 manufacturers' cameras, Sigma, 3 lenses on Canon and Nikon bodies, and 1 lens from Tamron mounted on Nikon. This is what it means to create halo models for an entire lineup. And in this case, I'd say Sony has succeeded, opening up a little can of whoop-ass on the big boys. Sigma has too, when you think about it. I guess Sony chose wisely by partnering with Zeiss, but I think Sigma, in particular, has a tremendous opportunity in E-mount glass if they really tune their focal ranges for APS-C. As, by the way, does anyone else who wants to play in that space, as attested to entries by Hand Division, Meyer Optic, LensBaby, and more. But what catches my eye the most surprising thing to me, is that Canon seems to have more better corrected lenses, especially around chromatic aberration, than Sony. I think chromatic aberration is now Sony's #1 image quality issue in its lenses. I'm wondering if that's because much of Canon's glass was developed before the current rage to correct via software rather than design physically. But maybe Sony's #2 issue overall, at least it is for me, is the paucity of small, high-quality, moderately priced APS-C coverage only primes. And zooms, for that matter. Yeah, really. For me, it's #1. Although, let's get real, I'm far more frustrated by my own shortcomings, and it's actually a little bit ridiculous that we have this many choices and that I'm complaining about it. Let's move on. Let's talk about some specific examples that I've had personal experience with. Context. I completed my conversion to Sony in 2016. I sold off all of my Canon glass, a bunch of L zooms, a couple of really nice primes, and added Sony's full-frame 28mm 2.0 and 90mm 2.8 macro, along with the APS-C only 12mm 2.8 Zeiss to it, to the E51.8 I bought originally with my Sony a6000. I also got Sony's 16-50 kit lens when I got the 6300. Now, the 28 and 50 are incredible pieces of glass. They're fast, silent, sharp, contrasty, small. The 90 is incredibly sharp and flexible because it's a macro. I love its close focusing distance, but it's also pretty big. It doesn't focus very quickly, and it makes a sound, an audible sound while it's focusing. I love the 2.8 when I use it, but it is a specialized focal length I don't use that often, and I therefore also cut it some slack. The kit lens, too soft, too slow, too feh. By December, I was feeling the need for another optic between 12 and 28 millimeters, a fast 16 millimeter prime that would give me the equivalent field of view of a full-frame 24 millimeter. Now, I passed on Sony's 16 millimeter 2.8 Pancake and the 16 to 70 Sony Zeiss for a number of reasons, most of which boiled down to IQ or speed trade-offs I wasn't willing to make, or else had other lenses to cover much of the focal range. I was also missing something longer than 90 millimeters, especially when I shot, which I like to do, urban landscapes, or covered 2 specific separate events during the 2016 presidential election cycle. Now, Sony's crop sensor E18205F4 did the business for me at one of those events, but I didn't love it. The price was right, the focal range was right enough, and image correction software in camera worked really well. But I wouldn't use it for personal work or my best commercial work. not wide enough or long enough if I were limiting myself to just one lens, not sharp enough, not fast enough, not tasty enough. I wish I'd had the RX10 Mark III at one point with its 600mm full-frame equivalent zoom, though without IBIS and with the prohibition of tripods and monopods at the Democratic National Convention, it might have been a dicey situation anyway. I wondered what else was out there. What would I actually pay for? What makes sense for you? Quick conversation with the good folks at Sony netted me a short-term loaner kit consisting of an A6500 along with their $1,000 24 1.8 E-mount only, APS-C, their $900 T-Star 55 1.8, their brand new $1,400 planar T-Star 50mm 1.4, which I call a baby G-Master since it looks pretty much exactly like a 2/3 version of the 85, and their $1,400 full-frame 70-200 f4. Now, I've already done a separate video on the 70-200, which is an exceptional lens, one I highly recommend, and one I will probably purchase this year. I've already done a separate video on the G-Masters, which are extraordinary, but too big and expensive for my taste, and not the ideal focal ranges for an A6 series body. And I've already done a video on the A6500, an update to the A6300 that I like, but don't feel compelled to buy. So with that preamble out of the way, let's begin with the APS-C only 24 and then move on to the full frame 50 and 55. It's really simple. I love the 24-1/8 small size, speed, and sharp contrasty image. I think I could probably wrap my head around the price. When I used it to record a separate gear review, the Sony SX2000 audio recorder. But honestly, I was disappointed to find chromatic aberration visible to the naked eye without pixel peeping, without even looking for it. It was just there. And since I find it impossible to correct CA and video footage during post, this really gave me pause, especially at the price. Now, to be fair, Sony's hardly alone in this regard. Check out my review of the almost $2,000 manual focus Zeiss 100mm f2 Milvis, which I loved, but I found a surprising amount of chromatic aberration there too. For stills, it's a button click or a slider. In video, it's something else. I just wish that CA weren't there. Now, the baby G-Master 50 was silky smooth, super sharp, contrasty, well-corrected, built like a tank, and huge, heavy, and expensive. I loved everything about it during a headshot session except its size, weight, price, and the fact that it's not image stabilized. Now, the 55 isn't image stabilized either, but I thought it was equally brilliant in the same shoot, indistinguishable from the 51.4 for headshots, in a much more petite, far less costly package. And it absolutely knocked my socks off when I used it in a review of teleprompters. I could immediately see the difference, which I didn't think was possible between it and the E51.8 OSS. I wasn't looking for it, but something about the footage made me do a double take, and that's when I took a closer look. I immediately felt it at normal viewing distance, the first time it came up on my screen in post. Again, candidly, I was shocked. I was shocked by how good it was. I love the 55, full stop. Well, I wish it were image stabilized too. If it came to it, my personal pick between the two would be the 55, hands down, especially for portrait work with its slightly extra reach. I would happily give up the fractional stop. In fact, the difference in depth of field would probably make the 55 a better choice for me because I'd probably get a higher percentage of sharp shots. 1.4 is that shallow, even when on a crop sensor body. The thing about both of these lenses, though, is that they're full frame coverage and they're expensive, which makes the E50mm 1.8 revelatory. Because If the little $250 APS-C only lens isn't quite as sharp edge to edge as the 55, which again is what blew me away about the 55, that's how good I think the 50 is, and not quite as well corrected on paper as the other two, according to DxOMark, although I think both are below the human eye's threshold to see for CA, it is still a brilliant lens, and this one is image stabilized. It's only when you have it side by side with the 55 that you know there's something actually better. But the E50 is tack sharp, well corrected, contrasty, tasty. On top of that, the little guy is at least as good as the recently introduced Econo FE 50mm 1.8, which, by the way, makes that lens pretty brilliant too. But the E has better build quality and dramatically better, quieter, faster autofocus. In other words, Sony can do great, fast, not even moderately priced, but in fact modestly priced APS-C primes when it chooses to do so. Now, I have to admit that my favorite shot during the portrait session was taken with the 51.4 Baby G Master. I also did some shooting with the 90mm 2.8, but I attribute this to an element of randomness. Speaking more to the subject, caught on a particular frame with a particular lighting setup, I used several, rather than the lens itself. All of which takes me back to the lack of moderately priced, high quality APS-C primes. Or, as I alluded to earlier, zooms for that matter. I was stunned by the image quality of Sony's $2,200 24-70 2.8 G Master down in Miami. But generally speaking, I just don't want lenses that big or expensive anymore, especially when the focal range is not ideal on a crop sensor body and the 24-70 doesn't have IS. When I travel, I'd rather have a small, faster lens on the body and another 2 or 3 small, faster lenses in a bag over my shoulder, like, let's say, for the A6 series 16, 28, 50, and 85. Or an APS-C coverage equivalent zoom about the size of Panasonic's image-stabilized Vario 12-35 2.8, or maybe, like is just announced, and also image-stabilized 12-60 2.8 to f4. Yeah, I don't really love the idea of that f4, but call it a 16-55 2.8. I'm looking forward to checking those Micro Four Thirds lenses out, and of course, going hands-on with Sony's 100 STF and 85 1.8. The 85 1.8 I understand immediately, though I'm disappointed not to find image stabilization mentioned. The STF lens, well, that's a new way of delivering a new kind of bokeh, so it's very innovative, but I've got a pile of questions around how that actually looks and how it actually works. Let me summarize. In the end, it seems clear that Sony is building out its lens line in a clever and time-tested way. 1, it has created a small number of full-frame halo products at the top, the G Masters and the STF, with the high prices and margins required to do so. I mean, they're not super high volume. 2, these halo products in turn, along with Sony's cameras themselves, are generating credibility and interest to drive more people into the Sony fold, creating a virtuous cycle where 3, Sony can spread the cost of R&D over a wider base and drive prices down. And finally, 4, or Sony can work with third-party manufacturers to fill those spaces where it's uneconomic for Sony to play, all to the benefit of we, the consumers. Just think Tesla with its first 3 vehicles, the 6-figure Roadster, Model S and Model X, and the next one coming out, the Model 3 at 1/3 the price, their first mass production car. At least that's what I hope is happening, because these first few killer lenses, or not, I see other APS-C Micro Four Thirds cameras and even 1-inch cameras, though let's face it, they're probably all using Sony sensors, becoming so good that full frame will go the way of medium frame, becoming smaller and smaller volume niche equipment. I think that this is where Sony's competition will come from next. Neither Canon nor Nikon have come back with a compelling response to Sony's APS-C offerings. Not their mainframe offerings, full frame offerings either. And with the new A99 II, more on this coming soon, I think Sony has come up with a compelling response to big DSLRs for people who want big DSLRs. But Sony has not yet come up with a compelling response to the imminently shipping GH5, the already shipping XT2, the Olympus EM1 Mark II, or even the Panasonic G85. Though again, I'll have to go hands-on to see what these can really do and how well they fit my needs. And of course, your mileage may vary. But I really do like the small form factor of Micro Four Thirds lenses, Panasonic's superior app, freedom from 30-minute recording limit and overheating. If you've watched any of my other recent videos, you know the drill. You know how I always say, yes, it's about the gear, but no, it's not about the gear, it's about the people. This little journey through Sony Lensland definitely reinforces my belief that it really does come down to us, our skills, our ambitions, our commitment, and the people we know more than our gear. It's fair to say we suffer from an embarrassment of technological riches. And an embarrassing, unjustifiable human poverty. But fine, that's another subject for another time, probably another channel. Maybe not. I'd like to hear your view, because if it's about people, the question becomes, what do we choose to see? And what do we choose to share? Or try it on like this. As image makers, what responsibility do we have to use our gifts wisely? Anyway, if you like what you saw here, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, take advantage of our crassly commercial affiliate links as a way of supporting the work we're doing whenever you think about buying gear, or in the case of Amazon, pretty much anything else. Yeah. For Three Blind Men and an Elephant, I'm Hugh Brownstone. See you next time.